Good afternoon, artists. I gotta say, I'm sorry, we had meetings all morning, so this video is gonna come to you a little bit later than I originally wanted, but hopefully it still helps you. Remember, all the due dates this week and this month are soft, okay? I want you to think of them that way, something to chip away at a little bit each day between getting all the other stuff you're worried about done. Today we're going to learn how to create the nose in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to teach you about things that vary with different people's noses, okay? And same thing with our mouths and our ears. So that's going to be some really cool stuff for you to finally get some understanding of, and hopefully it helps you draw all the people that you're going to want to draw. Okay, so in the last two videos, we did a couple of things. Number one, we learned to draw eyes like an absolute boss. And number two, we learned how to lay everything out so that we could block in the face and have all the proportions work. That's probably one of the worst things that people run into when they start trying to draw faces is all this hard coding we have that wants to mess with the proportions and where things are. So giving yourself a good formula, a good way around that is definitely key. A couple things I want to point out to you before we move on to the nose is that number one, those eyes that we practiced are just starter eyes. They're kind of like a robot, and then we have to give it the rest of the smoothness to make it into a real person. That's the point at which you want to be looking at a picture of the real person you're trying to draw, or actually looking at the real person you're trying to draw in person in order to see, well, does, this little loop-de-loo, does that come up a little bit higher on the person I'm drawing? Maybe their gravity acts on their lower eyelid in a different way than some other people. And so you're going to see slight variations in the curves and the angles. So you want to try to pick up as much of that as possible, because that's where our likeness lives, right? So anyway, when you're done with that, notice I got rid of all my guidelines within that eyeball and I shaded around like it's a sphere, okay? The guidelines that I used, this is huge in getting it all to line up, was kind of like a cross dividing the eye square into four. So don't skip that step. That step is absolutely crucial because otherwise you're going to have like one eye kind of floating further up here or down here. And that's what gets it looking wonky, like you're used to being frustrated by. So let's go ahead and jump in to drawing noses. Noses are another big place we get the likeness of a person. So there are a couple big things that can vary in a nose. Number one is the bridge, okay? You might have a bridge that looks like this, especially with us glasses wearers, we tend to develop a nose bump. Okay, but some people just have a natural nose bump. You might have it sort of jut out and then back inward as it goes toward the bottom of the nose, okay? You might have somebody with kind of a really cool, delicate hourglass shape to the bridge of their nose, okay? Or you might have somebody whose nose kind of comes down pretty straight, okay? All of these I've seen on people a whole bunch. I've also seen maybe something more like this. Okay, that's sort of the more triangular nose. I've seen this on a whole bunch of people, every single one of these. So look at the person you have and try to figure out which one is closest. That is the best way that I could teach you to do that. Okay, so once we have that figured out, we know that it comes down from the brow and this really cool sort of trapezoid we have called a glabella. That is such a tricky word for me, but I love saying it, glabella. Okay, so that would be how each of these noses start. Okay, ooh, there we go. I'm right up against my tripod here. So on like the diamond shaped nose, it's usually not as extreme as I just drew it to show you guys. It's going to be a little bit smaller. And then we're going to go to the bulb of the nose, which lives about here. But the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to draw that in and get committed before you figure out the nostrils. Okay, So nostrils are this really cool thing. This is another big, big place that our likeness lives. So I'm just gonna kind of from a hat choose one of these noses to develop, and I think I'll go with the diamond shape because that's my nose. Okay. When we look at the real person, we want to sight the angle underneath their nostril. Okay, so they have this right here, that's the septum. And then the angle underneath their nostril is going to tell us a lot about how the bulb of the nose is shaped. So mine is like really extreme, you guys. Have you ever noticed I have this really big flare on my nostrils? It goes uphill really fast. It's kind of one of my more interesting features, I think. So that kind of comes up and then down like a mountain really fast. Okay. So I can draw a cross up and then down. All right. So it's this angle right here that we've got to capture on the person. Two things about it. What degree does it sit at? And how long is it? Okay. Because that's going to give you kind of the width of the nose. All right. And we know that everybody's got a different width on their nose. That's one of the cool things that makes us all different. Okay. So mine's probably a little bit thinner than that, but that slope is very, very steep. Okay, you're going to see it when you look at me from the side in some of these videos. So where do I go from here? Okay, what I want to do is I want to think of the bulb of the nose as almost like a sphere. Okay, kind of like we did with the eye. Only problem is I don't want to connect that, or I don't want to disconnect it from the bridge. So I got to make sure I erase right there. Okay. Then around the nostrils, there's going to be a little bit of shadow behind them. Okay. Again, we don't want to look like we're chopping things off of the rest of the face. So stay away from heavy outlines unless it's a place where you know there's an actual opening in something, like right here. Okay. We're just using a little bit of shadow to set that apart. And then over here around the bridge of the nose, same story. Okay. Just some soft shadow is what we need to set it apart. I can even erase these hard lines around the bridge of the nose because I really, really, really don't want to look like I'm making a cutout face. That's one of the ways that we'll graduate to being a really high-level portrait artist, is if we get rid of the cutout feel. Okay? So now, to get these nostrils, I'm just going to shade underneath them. That's like the thing that, you're used to seeing, like young kids, they'll draw this way. Okay. Those sort of black holes. And maybe they draw a squiggle like that. These things right here, what we're used to thinking of as that, is really just a shadow coming down onto the upper lip created by the nostril. Okay, so that's all we got to do. We're just going to shade that shadow and let it fade away as we go down. Shade, 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 fade, fade, fade. Shade, 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 fade, fade, fade. Last thing we have is something cool that's going to connect us right into the mouth. It's called a philtrum. Okay, and it's kind of shaped like the head of an axe. Okay, so if you just think of the head of an axe, it's going to be a really soft shadow in the middle of it. Okay, something like that. So that's basically the nose. Let's go ahead and pause here, and I'll show you what that looks like on my grid of the face. Okay, I got that mostly drawn in for you, but I want to show you really quick what happens when you run that shadow that we did for the valley that comes down from the center of our nose. Okay, when we run that up against the eyeball, there's this really cool kind of ridge moment that'll happen between the eyeball and the nose and kind of the eye cavity right here. Okay, we're used to seeing that ridge moment when we look at people, so I want you to make sure you get that. Okay. You see how that just kind of, I'm letting some of this stuff stay like it is, but I'm getting dark next to it, and that's what creates that little ridge. You see I've already got it over here. Pretty cool. All right, so that's it for the nose. But before we move on, I want to show you, what happens when you have somebody's nose that looks different from mine. Okay. So a lot of people have wider noses than I do. Mine's pretty narrow. So what happens when you have somebody with a wider nose? Well, we're going to sight and measure that. Okay. And it might come out at an angle more like so. Okay, what I think of for right here is it's like a fish hook. Okay, so if I can think of different kinds of fish hooks, I've basically got what the nostrils do. Or candy canes, you could think of candy canes in different sizes and shapes. So here would be the septum, here's the nostrils, and then we're just going to build the rest of the nose around that. Okay, and when we get to the next step where I show you how to find the corners of the mouth, that's what you're going to use, is you're going to use this outside point right here and right here. Okay, this next step is really, really cool for finding the corners of the mouth, because as many people as I've ever tried it on, it works. It's super cool. It's like one of those things that's in all of our DNA somehow. So, yeah, you're going to have to sight and measure people's septums too. That's a place we get a lot of likeness as well. So, you've kind of got, this is like a pretty darn wide end of the spectrum of noses, and then this is a pretty darn narrow end of the spectrum, and you're going to find all sorts of stuff in between on different people that you meet. Okay. So bringing that all together, that might come out something like so. All right. So everybody got a different nose, and we're going to figure out how to use it to find the corners of everybody's mouth. Okay, so right here we have this point in the middle of our middle square, the very middle point. That is the glabella, that funky word that always trips me up. And we're going to use it to start a little triangle, very, very soft. Okay. Cool. Whoop. And cool. And notice where I'm bringing the triangle over is this outside edge of the nostril. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to find that vertical spot to cross it with that we figured out before. So we went 1/2, remember, down to the eyes. That's half of the head. And then we went 1/2 of what's left to find the bottom of the nose. Okay. Or you can say here on square 6, that's about 1/4 into square 6. And then that 1/3 also might be something like 1/4 of the bottom quarter of square 6 above square 7. Okay. So wherever that is, that's basically going to be our mouth opening at rest. Okay. And then we have this little notch right here. You can kind of feel that on your own face if you so choose. The mouth then kind of curls up a little bit. Okay. And right there where we left the triangle, that's going to be the corners, where we have some cheek muscle over here creating a shadow down here. Okay. The mouth also functions a lot like the eyes because it creates a little tent to keep unwanted things out. Okay. So I create these little shadows here to remind me of both those things. Okay, number one, that the lower lip is not going to come out as far this way as the upper lip does. All right, now to finish the upper lip, I must ask you to think of a mustache. Okay, the reason mustaches are shaped the way they are is that, well, they're following the upper lip. So we're going to think of a cartoon mustache that's going to help me get the shape up here and down here. Okay, then over here, I'm going to think two things. Number one, I allowed for that shadow, and that's going to be how much further I bring in the corner of this. Okay, and then number two, the lower lip, somebody's lower lip is always about 1/3 bigger this way than their upper lip. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this like 2 parts in this 1 part, if that makes sense to you guys. Don't exaggerate that though. Gotta be careful. Okay, we have a little shadow on our chinny chin chin. Okay, and the upper lip is going to catch way less light. It's kind of like having your baseball glove pointed the wrong way. So we're gonna always make sure the upper lip stays a bit darker, and that's because light usually comes from over our heads. If we think about where most of our light comes from, unless we're telling a scary story with a flashlight, it's gonna be coming from a ceiling lamp or the sun or somewhere overhead. Okay? Before we leave the nose real quick, I'm noticing these nostrils need to kind of hang back from the center of the nose. So I'm going to go ahead and let them do that. They will have their own little highlight, but it's all going to hang back and stay further down on the light and dark scale than this does right here. Okay? So you got to work your levels here. All right. We've got the mouth. Notice when I create a little bit of stripities or shadow and stuff, I'm always worried about what direction they should be traveling. If it's just out from center, that's what I do. Okay. Same thing, if we want to address eyelashes at any point, we're bringing them up and out from center. A lot of artists just leave eyelashes out. They're sort of a hassle, and if you're working small or you're working in sculpture, for instance, they may not work physically. So that's a reason you see a lot of art missing eyelashes. Ears. Ears is the last thing I want to cover today. Okay, we have seen a lot of ears, like peanut or a squiggle, and folks just kind of leave them there. If we want to graduate from that, we've got to build ourselves a nice shopping list of stuff that we need. Okay, so one thing that we need is this. It's the helix of the ear. Okay, this is what it looks like from the side of someone's head. Okay, and it turns into their earlobe. You can think of it as a big question mark, or you can think of it, if we're thinking angular, it's kind of like a coat hanger. Okay, and it turns into the earlobe. People have two kinds of earlobes. They can be connected or disconnected. Okay, connected is going to look like this. Disconnected is going to look like this. All right, so what does it look like from this view where we're looking at the front of somebody's head? We're going to put the helix in here a little bit like a, well, facing this way, it's a number 7, okay? Okay, over here it would be like a backwards number 7. And it's just got some extra tail here where that leaves the side of the head, okay? You're gonna see a tiny bit of the back of the helix, but here's the deal, it gets cut off right away by this little hill called the anti-helix. So let's just draw a little hill. See, 1, 2, 3, we got a hill. Okay, in front of the anti-helix is something called a tragus. It's a smaller hill. Okay, so you can think of like the shape of a staple if we bent the corners open. All right, now back behind here, we're going to see our helix again. And that's going to create our earlobe. Okay, we're going to see a little loop right here and something called an antitragus. Okay, so anti means against. That's a big clue for you to remember these. This is the tragus, this is the antitragus, this is the helix, this is the antihelix. Okay, right there in the space between, we have this little notch. That's where our ear canal is. That's where the opening is, where we hear things. Okay, last thing you want to do is create a little notch right here. The antihelix is kind of shaped like a big cursive Y. You'll notice if you touch your own ear, you've got a little valley right there you can put your finger on. So to get a really real looking ear, we want to create that little valley there. Okay. We might shade around it just a little bit to create that kind of hilly effect. And there you have somebody's ear when you're looking at their nose. This is about as far as I want to load you down today. I don't want to overload you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll teach you some more about putting it all together in my next video on Monday. My next video, we're going to cover kind of the outside shape of the skull and what the heck hair does, because hair is a very, very tricky animal. All right. Have an awesome day.